Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. Everybody listening to this is in for a real treat today. I have my good friend, Emily DuBose, who is our guest today for today's podcast. And you're going to love hearing her story. It is an amazing story. And what I particularly love about it is it's an amazing story that is true, I feel like, in a sense like mine, of just what God's done with an ordinary life and what God can do if we're just willing to say yes, to say yes to crazy things. So Jim Collins is a well-known business author, and he has this concept that I think about when I think about your life, Emily. I think about it in a sense with mine too. He has this phrase called a BHAG, and a BHAG is a big, hairy, audacious goal. You know, that our lives perhaps can be something about something that seems insane, crazy, that we might do, and that the best of life sometimes comes out when we're willing to step out into a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. So I think of you with that, and I think of sitting down in this little area where we do the podcast probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, and you were telling me the story of Lighthouse RVA, which is an amazing story. Everybody's going to want to hear about this. But I thought, wow, this is absolutely amazing what you've done. And my first thought was, I didn't know you had it in you.
Yeah, you knew that.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, so this is just going to be really fun to hear your story. And thanks for stepping out to do this.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, I'm going to be quiet now because what I would love for you to do is to just tell those who are listening your story, and not just the story of Lighthouse RVA, although maybe you can begin by just telling everybody what Lighthouse RVA is, and then step back and say, where did all this come from?
Sure.
Go back as far as you want.
Okay. Yes. Well, the Lighthouse RVA, our mission is to create a safe and loving community where women in recovery and volunteers alike find joy, hope, healing, and empowerment to take their next best step. And we do this by providing opportunities to nurture healthy relationships with one another and also connection to vital resources, both in-house and also in the community. And so it's been an incredible journey and a really remarkable story. And so in terms of my background, I grew up here in Richmond, and I would say that I had a fairly ordinary life where my basic needs were met, and I went to the same school for 13 years and then went off to college, and I was in commercial real estate for a little while, and I took some time off when I had my children and stayed home with them and got involved in the community with volunteer work, and then ended up working at a school where we came alongside by providing education for children living in poverty through a full scholarship for every child. And then again, took some time off to be with my family and dove back into volunteer work.
So step back for a minute when I hear, because I know your parents are phenomenal people, and I know the school you went to, the neighborhood. It's all kind of very familiar to me. But the step from the ordinary, relatively affluent lifestyle that we both enjoyed to even working in commercial real estate to making the choice to work at the school for underprivileged kids. What led to that? What caused you either to get into that job or to want to get into that job?
Well, that's a whole story in and of itself. It was actually not something that I sought out, but through circumstances in our family, I after taking time off to be with the kids, I went out, seeking employment and decided to pursue admissions. And so I was hoping to work at my children's school, and which did not pan out, and was given some suggestion to go attend a particular conference. And there I happened to sit next to the assistant head of this school where I eventually would work.
Right.
And so,
which was St. Andrews. I'm sorry.
yes,
That's
no,
right. Yes.
right.
Okay.
And so that's a whole nother story, but I do believe that was God directed and wholly, inspired. One thing led to another, and I ended up working at that school because I ended up sitting next to this woman at this conference,
Wow.
and that opened my eyes up to a whole nother beautiful experience in my life that I do believe was part of the sort of ongoing thread that was leading to where I am now.
That is so neat. I almost feel like over the last year or so that I've been doing the podcast Space for Life, we've almost had like a theme verse that has gone along, of which, this story reminds me of it. And it's the verse, man makes his plans, but it's the Lord's purposes that prevail.
Yes.
And, I just wanted to kind of get into admissions work, and I even wanted to work in this school, but I happen to sit here, and I happen, all
Right.
of these
And one
things that it's like, okay, you had your plans. They made sense. They were totally normal, all good in and of themselves. But it's like God grabbed and said, I think I've got something different for you.
Very different. Yes. It's amazing, really, when I think about it. And it was such a gift in my life. And so it was actually through my work at St. Andrews that I really developed strong friendships with families who had not only experienced living in poverty, but they had also a lived experience with some addiction and trauma. And that's kind of where my journey started, gaining more of an understanding of of all of the hardship that goes along with addiction, and how hard it is and how it affects the family so deeply.
Did that feel intimidating and fearful for you, or not?
It was more just an awareness that it was a very humbling, because I realized how little I knew. And maybe in the past, just to be perfectly honest, I had certain thoughts or thinking, oh, why can't this person just choose to be well? And that's just not the way it works. And so it was deeply humbling is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, I love the way you're describing this, because the two things I'm hearing is, one, you say this was such a gift to me, and the way we often at least initially, think of things like what you're doing with Lighthouse RVA and what you did with St. Andrews is, well, it's such an act of service. It's such a sacrifice. It's your choosing to pour out, to give out of your life. And what you're describing, and I've had the similar experiences, those things that seem from the outside to be most sacrificial are actually the greatest gifts to us. We're the ones who actually get the most joy out of it, and satisfaction and meaning and purpose. And yeah, maybe it's serving in some sense, but we're the biggest beneficiaries of it.
Right, absolutely. And it's kind of I've just have continually been reminded the power of community and love and community, and that we really, as a people, are more alike than we are different. we all have the same basic longings. And so, and that's what has been, that's what drove actually the beginning of the Lighthouse RVA was as I was spending time through some volunteer work, just developing relationships with women in recovery from addiction, volunteering with some amazing organizations in Richmond. There's so many amazing nonprofit organizations that come alongside people in recovery.
And this was after St. Andrews.
This was after St. Andrews, yes.
Right. Okay.
And I was doing some volunteer work through my church where I had the privilege of being the sort of the contact between the church and the organizations that we were supporting financially. So that was even a more exposure to these amazing people in the community coming alongside women in recovery. And I just would hear women in that situation saying, and especially those who are under-resourced, and then trying to be in recovery and stay in recovery, say, what's the point? Because we can't go back to our old community when we were in active addiction. And so where do we go? Where will we find that? And so that was kind of the initial breaking of my heart moment that I believe really started that stirring in my heart toward the Lighthouse RVA.
Yeah, that's I think, not understood piece of addiction. So I heard a study a long time ago back from the Vietnam War where during the Vietnam War, 25% of all of the soldiers became addicted to heroin. And the United States was fearful of bringing all of these heroin addicts back into the United States. They surprisingly found, even though heroin is one of the most addictive substances that exists, that when these soldiers were re-engaged in their community, about 85 to 90% of them were able to overcome their addiction. And the only ones that weren't were people who, to the largest extent, already were struggling with substance abuses. That is, they were coming back into a community that was already part of their addictive lifestyle, whereas the rest of the people were coming back to a community that didn't have to deal with that. And the whole success or failure in addiction recovery was based on the environment, the community that they were entering into. And that's like what you're saying.
Well, it was interesting. And another part of the story, to your point, in the beginning, I shared sort of the longing of my heart in this regard with a friend who had started a nonprofit. And he said, I have somebody I want you to meet. And so her name is Crystal. And so we met, never having seen each other before, at Galaxy Diner in Carytown. And this was before anything happened with the Lighthouse RVA. And we just met, and I sort of shared what was on my heart. And my friend seemed to think that Crystal had the same vision. And so that's why he wanted us to meet. So I asked her about her story, and I said, what made you want to get together with me? And she shared with me that her story, which was very difficult, and she was in recovery and had a very challenging battle with addiction, where she ended up incarcerated for a decent period of time. And she shared with me that out of her graduating class from the drug court class that she graduated from, there were 8 people. And she was the only one of the 8 that had not since died of a drug overdose. And
Oh my gosh.
She said to me, the reason I believe that is the case is because I had community when I returned, and I had friends who came alongside me, and together, it's been one day at a time. But she said to me, how strongly she felt that this developing a community for women in recovery was so important because she was lived proof of that.
Hmm.
And she said it's just was very hard for her friends to find. And so together we kind of said, okay, what might that look like if we tried something, just took a small step?
Because as good as AA is, or something like that, and it is a kind of community, it's not really what you're talking about, or is it?
It's important. I mean, I
Right.
think that's very important. What the Lighthouse RVA is trying to provide is a place where women in recovery, any woman in recovery, regardless of their lived experience, can come and just simply enjoy themselves together. To
Hmm.
just it sounds so basic, but it's just so important. We just get together every week. We share a meal, a hot, delicious catered meal, and we all kind of write down what we want to do that might be an activity that would be joy infusing. And, it may be as simple as making jewelry together or flower arranging, or we've done line dancing, arts and crafts. But it's a time to be together that is not centered around recovery,
Yes,
if that makes sense.
it makes total sense. Yeah.
Because a lot of the women who are coming are living in transitional housing situations where they might be early on in their recovery. So from 8 to 5, they are in very regimented programming surrounding their recovery, which is super important.
Hmm.
And there's also a need for that, just that downtime.
Yeah, I've seen so many of the things that you've done and with Lighthouse RVA, and what strikes me is how ordinary the things are. They're just you just have fun with them.
Right.
And it's kind of like, okay, well, what good's that going to do? From the outside, you
Sure.
can easily kind of go, well, you're doing crafts. Like,
Right.
what difference is that going to make in anybody's life? And now you're doing line dancing, but I imagine just the experience of being able to relax for a moment and have fun. That's probably, I don't know, maybe it's the only places many of those women ever experienced joy.
Well, we have
Thanks.
had some friends say that the other day, actually, we were all of a sudden, because we don't really ask anyone their story. There's no expectation. That's the other piece that we didn't realize, but we have been told that is a beautiful thing for the women who come, that we are loving and everybody's hugging each other, but there are no expectations.
Hmm.
So it's and so we did have a friend say the other day that she made this comment that she feels normal when she comes. And I don't
Wow.
know exactly what she meant, but she just said she just feels good when she's able to just come and just enjoy that time. And so that's really our goal. We do have other resources that we provide in
Sure.
house that
Yeah.
are a little more, supportive beyond just the community piece. But we have a note writing team. And so when we share things, we all share, what's going on in our lives. Our note writing team will follow up
Yeah.
and write a note. And that has been an incredible expression of love that we didn't even realize the impact that even that simple thing would have.
Hmm.
Where we're trying to really do what we say we're going to do, which is to love well and be attentive, like you do for your family.
So simple.
It really is.
Yeah. But deep, profound. Yeah. So I want to back up in your story some, because hearing you tell this again, there's kind of throw out a little bit of a hypothesis that God brought this spark, unintended spark in your life when you were going back to work, and led you to St. Andrews. Not that you were really looking for it, but kind of led you to it. But then subsequent to that, it seems like that there were a series before Lighthouse RVA kind of came into your mind of some smaller yeses. I mean, you could have said, okay, I had a job at St. Andrews. I finished that job. I'll now just re enter into my normal life enrichment with my kids. But you chose to volunteer again. You chose a few steps along the way that, at least as I imagine it, they all were yeses. Not as big a yes necessarily as Lighthouse RVA, but they were, yeah, I want to keep on doing this. This is important. So were they, like, in a sense, smaller yeses?
I, I, I guess so. I haven't thought about it that way, but yes. And they were, I would say that I feel like we all have certain pulls in our heart to our passions,
Yes.
areas of our lives that fill our souls, if that makes sense, where what you're doing with your time is, and we all have, I don't know how to explain it, but just, I guess, pull is the way that I would describe that. And
Yeah.
so in the volunteer work, it was interesting how, we gravitate towards certain topics or areas where our heart breaks. And over time, it seemed to be that those were all little pieces that were building up to
There were hints for
this.
you.
They were hints
Yeah.
for kind of where the path may lead.
Well, and where I think this is so important is that, so many of us wonder how we're led by God. And we think of something like a Lighthouse RVA or something like that, that from the outside seems like a very massive, BHAG, intimidating step, and not realizing that God's leading into these paths is often much gentler, and there's just this simple luring into it, and that when God calls us to something, when our lives call us to something, it doesn't often just drop out of the sky without any hint. We're drawn, and then all of a sudden there becomes this bigger opportunity, this bigger call to something that makes sense. So, I look at your life not knowing a lot of that story, and I think of Lighthouse RVA. Where in the world did that come from? But then when you tell your story, I go, well, that makes total sense. You had this incredible experience of joy and significance and meaning at St. Andrews, and then you had these other experiences, and that created some connections with people who then put you with this person, and it seems like a very logical path, but wouldn't seem that way normally.
Well, and I will say, along the way, there were several situations where I felt like it might be this or that. And then so I went down a path and would start something or dabble in something. And then it just kind of fell apart. And I thought, what in the world? There were actually many of those in that interim period. But interestingly, now I had an experience this past year that was directly tied to sort of an area that we stepped into at the Lighthouse RVA, which was workforce development. And I kept as we were kind of praying about the next steps and do we enter into this, because there's so many different directions that we could go,
right,
to try to come alongside and elevate our friends in recovery. But we all, just like in our day-to-day lives, we have to seek discernment for that, because there are a lot of different ways we can all go. And so we were praying about this, and I kept remembering this friend of mine who I had met I think I met her twice in one of these endeavors that in my mind failed.
Oh, wow.
And so I thought, well, I've got to just email because it will not leave my brain. And I hadn't emailed her in 7 years. I didn't even know if her email was the same. I emailed her and I said, her name is G. I said, G, I have no idea if this is even your email anymore. I don't know if you remember me. I think we're supposed to meet. And I actually don't know why, but I kind of want to check in with you and see if we can have coffee. She emailed me back and she said, I cannot believe this, but your name came up for the first time in 7 years this week. And I think we're supposed to meet too. We got together, shared what updates on each other, just normal coffee catching up. And I had told her that we happened to mention the workforce readiness idea. And she said, I cannot believe this. I feel like this has been my calling for a long time, and I've been dabbling in this in the East End. And I want to come do this for the Lighthouse RVA. I want to do a pilot program in workforce readiness.
That's amazing.
And Tommy, I kid you not, I met her twice. I think I met her twice. And we were in this small group together. We were trying to do an inner city group of just getting together with people and praying. And then it turned out the space was no longer available and the whole thing fell apart. And I just was really kind of down on myself, thinking I'm just running after all these things and just chasing rabbits, as my husband says.
Right. Yeah.
And sure enough, it turned out that God used those two encounters 7 years later.
That's wild and crazy.
So I say that only to say that there were so many times that I felt like I was trying to follow what I thought I was supposed to be doing, and it just fell flat on its face. But I think that I truly believe that God uses everything, that he uses the hard situations, because behind the scenes, what led me to St. Andrews was a whole nother story that was a really hard time for my family for a lot of reasons. And I ended up at St. Andrews, which then was such a gift in my life that then led me to my volunteer work that allowed me to have the privilege of being in relationship with just all these amazing people.
Yeah. But we only see those things in the rearview mirror.
Exactly.
And that's the thing is that, we have this really false impression that, when we're called to do something big, then, the seas part and all these things just come together in this beautiful, natural symphony. But it's like, oh, I failed at this. I had no question, no one wondering what was going to happen. Is all this a waste of time? And then God just knits all of this stuff together, and this one interaction out of this failed opportunity comes back 7 years later in some clear way. And I just think that's an incredible inspiration, encouragement to just keep on.
Yes. Just keep do on. The next step.
Yes.
And yeah. And it's just, I remember might be going off, but another little part of the story was after a series of those kinds of what I sort of deemed in my mind as failed attempts to follow the lead that I thought I was supposed to follow. A friend of mine sent a podcast, Amy Julia Becker.
Yeah.
Patricia Clark, actually, your
Amy
fellow podcaster.
That's right.
And Amy Julia was just
on, yeah.
So
small world.
Out of the blue, I put in quotes, my friend Patricia sent me an Amy Julia Becker podcast with a graduate from an organization called Thistle Farms in Nashville, Tennessee. And that is a 2-year, they provide a free 2-year residential recovery program for women survivors of sex trafficking and addiction.
Wow.
It's a phenomenal program. Mm-hmm. And she sent me this podcast in the height of sort of my just trying to figure out what it was that was in my heart. And it was the sort of trigger point, if you will, for me. It grabbed my heart to the point that I thought to myself, I don't know what is happening, but I think I need to really look at what the next step is, because I think the time is now. My fear, I need to let this pull out, and honestly, just trusting God outweigh my fear of being ill-equipped to start down this path of figuring out community for women in recovery. And I went online and saw that Thistle Farms, they offer a workshop for anyone to come and learn and replicate their model. And I told my husband, I can't explain this, but I have to go to Nashville, Tennessee, and I have to do this workshop. And I went, and the CEO, and I felt like a fool, because we're sitting in this room and people are standing up talking about their organizations that are 15 years in the making, and I'm this and that, and this is my background. And I had to just stand up and say, I'm Emily DuBose, and that's all I got. I got nothing else. I'm not sure.
Love that.
I'm not sure why I'm here, but
yeah.
I'm here, and I'm just so thankful to take all of your wisdom in. And I left there. The CEO said, go back to where you live and look at what's happening in your community, and either join the good work that is happening, or if you see a gap, just try to step into it. Take what you have and just take the next step. And he said, you will screw up. We have made so many mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes. And that's how it works. And I can't explain it, but that experience, I came back and I thought, okay, we're just going to start with it. And so we found free space, and I found 2 friends who were willing to say yes. And we hosted our first gathering in free space, and we just provided a meal. We invited the women who I already knew in recovery, and we made jewelry. And one thing led to another.
That is so great. That's just so amazing. And it's an amazing story, but I just can't imagine how daunting that was to say yes to that inner leading and say, I'm going to leave Richmond, Virginia. I'm going to drive here. I feel like crazy. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going to say, that was a huge yes. It had to have felt insane that you were doing it.
It felt insane, but really, to be honest, because I will say that I am a fearful person in general. I live with a lot of fear and worry. But I am telling you the truth when I say that going to Nashville was not scary. It seemed, I didn't understand it, but it was like God's promises are true, that, it's in his strength, not our own. I really felt like he was leading that. And I can't really explain it, except that I'm telling you, I'm in fear a lot of my life. But in those moments, I was not afraid. And so it's bizarre.
Yeah, but can't explain it, but
you can't. It's a mystery.
Yeah, right,
and so there it is.
Yeah.
Faith is a mystery.
Yeah.
But so that,
That's incredible. The whole thing is really, it's incredible, but I think that's what God would have for so many of us, if we would just lean into, what he wants, where he leads. So, and I think from that angle, I'd love for you to just share, if you're imagining in your mind, let's just say a room full of women, for the sake of argument, that were in a similar place to where you were, let's say pre-St. Andrews. What would you want to encourage them, or what would you say to them about life and where it was going? That's a tough one.
Oh my word, that is a tough one. I guess I would just say that, trusting that, just do the very next thing. that you
Yeah.
feel called to do, and not getting too worked up about the future. Just kind of, I don't, I love what Becca Stevens said about doing the small things with great love. Do the
Mm.
small things with great love, and that will have the biggest impact. And just listening to your heart. I mean, that sounds so, I don't, but I think that when you feel a nudge that won't go away about your next step,
Right.
don't be afraid to just move toward that.
I love that. I came up with this thought a while back. I was reading in the Bible the story of Peter walking on the water. And that's like a crazy story. Someone walking on the water. And I wondered as I was reading this story, what led Peter, when he saw Jesus walking on the water, to ask Jesus, can I come out and walk on the water too? And I thought, how do you make that kind of leap to that type of thing? And so I came up with this phrase that I think about when it comes to faith, and it's the phrase puddle walking.
Hmm.
That very often before we're called to walk on water, we're called to step through puddles. In those puddles, you still don't know what's underneath. You don't necessarily know how deep it is or whatever. But we begin with that next step, that small yes, that
Right.
small, I don't even know where this is going. It's not a big deal, but yeah, I'll take the next step.
Right.
And that's,
And also, for this, for my experience, it is just everybody has their next step.
yes,
And so whatever it is that you're called to do, you're not being called to do it alone. It's
yeah,
not about you. It's not about me. It's God is at work all the time, and is in, and I believe that I can finally, I feel like I can say this. There was a time when I thought, I don't even know what, if somebody said, what are your gifts? I would not be able to tell them what they were. But I feel like he's given us pieces of himself to use for his good. And so and he will bring together the complete puzzle. Like we are each a piece of the puzzle that he has created. And he doesn't ask us to just be that one piece. He brings all the other pieces
yes,
together to accomplish his will. So we don't need to worry about and overthink it, because I'm famous for overthinking it, all this. And that's a lack of faith on my part, because God is God and I am not. And so he doesn't call us to do whatever it is he's calling us to do alone, would be the other thing I would say, because the Lighthouse RVA, as an example, is just 100, people's gifts and talents and offerings at the table. And we're all, it's this beautiful picture of community, is all I can say. And so it's all the pieces together that make it a beautiful thing.
yeah. You're
And that make it happen.
You're part of it, but
One
just a
little
part.
small part.
Yeah.
Just my part happened to be in the beginning.
Yeah.
But then everybody else.
But there are a lot of people that are involved in Lighthouse RVA that for them, it's their small yes.
Right, exactly.
It's their next step, and they may just be volunteering for it, or they might be, in some other role, or just showing up and stuff, but it's their small yes.
Right.
Just like it was at one point for you.
And that has been a really beautiful, humbling thing to watch when we're all together, is that we truly are a we.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, we have volunteers, and then we have women who come to us in recovery, and we have volunteers who are in recovery. And when we're all together, our lived experiences and backgrounds and some of the things that would normally cause us to divide or not even want to be, in conversation together for one reason or another, all of that falls away. And it's just, women loving women. And we had a friend in recovery who has experience with incarceration and homelessness tell us the other day, we were all together painting hearts. And she said, a long time ago, I think that if we had all been walking down the street passing each other, we would have turned the other direction. Both of
Yes.
us would have judged one another and would have not given each other the time of day. And here we are together at a table painting hearts together. And it was just a beautiful picture of, I feel like, the way it's
Well,
supposed to be.
that's just like a living example of the Good Samaritan. The people that were saying, "Oh, I'm passing by on the other side of the street," and the whole point of the story is who is your neighbor, and the Good Samaritan that came was just a neighbor. Just are no differences.
Right.
Someone was in need, I helped them.
Right.
They're just
And
a
we're
person.
all in need.
We're all in need.
Is the
Yeah.
thing. That's the thing, is we're all in need. And just to watch everyone, because when we're at the table, we are all there for each other equally.
Yes.
And
Regardless of whether you're volunteering or you're a recovering addict.
right.
Right.
It's truly,
Yeah.
it's been just incredible.
Yeah. So I know this also is hard. Where do you see, or do you have any sense of kind of what's next for Lighthouse RVA?
Well, we just kind of go day to day with open hand in a full state of surrender. And we do have some exciting thoughts about, various directions that we might go as a community. We're trying to listen and evolve and step into, like we say, the gaps, and not necessarily try to do things that are already being done. But I will say the first thing we hope is to find a permanent home. We're in rented space right now.
Okay.
In a wonderful location. We hope to find a permanent space where we can continue to find ways to love each other well, and offer more opportunities for health and wellness, and and a variety of other
Right.
areas.
That sounds very neat.
Yes.
Well, seeing things a little bit from the outside, from where I am, I will say it seems like while you might be just going day to day, open hands, it also appears to me like you are providing a lot of very intentional, strong leadership to Lighthouse RVA. That's not so much just going day by day, wondering, what's next. That you have a lot of intentionality.
We do have intention. We do. Yes, we are. Right. I don't mean that lightly.
No,
right? But
no, I know you.
We do. We really just want to listen.
Yes,
to the community, and then we want whatever happens to be community driven.
Yeah.
And led, because
that's
kind of
that's the way it should be. Yeah.
Of our hopes.
Yeah. So Lighthouse RVA is a nonprofit.
It's 501c3.
501c3. How would people connect to Lighthouse RVA, either to just learn about it, to potentially volunteer, to potentially give? All of those are wonderful ways of taking the next step.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So our website is www.thelighthouse.rva.org.
The Lighthouse RVA.
And RVA, the in the beginning, RVA on the end, are very important because there are quite a few lighthouse organizations out there we have discovered. Right. And then an email to contact us related to any questions. We'd love to invite people to come over and see the space and learn more. Volunteering, that is info@thelighthouse.rva.org.
Okay, great. And on social media, Instagram
is at the Lighthouse RVA.
At the Lighthouse RVA.
Okay. And Facebook is the Lighthouse RVA.
Yeah, and I this is certainly a place I encourage the social media, because I think you get a really quick flavor of the fun that y'all are having and the difference, and just, Lighthouse RVA, I think of the people, all of the people, whether it's the volunteers or the different people you're working to help, everybody has just got this big smile on their face.
We have a good time.
Yeah. And
there's a lot of laughter.
Yeah. And I look and I can't tell who's who in terms of the whole
great.
thing.
It's great.
Yeah.
And we do also, I'll just say this as well. We have a boutique where we have tag on and very gently used clothing and accessories.
Great.
So that is another way to contribute, is through that. So we will, and we have at all times toiletries, your basic toiletries, hygiene, feminine hygiene items.
Okay.
Because we have found that those were hard to get quickly. So that was one place that we stepped into pretty quickly, so that when we receive calls from program directors or house managers where women might be coming right off the street or out of incarceration with nothing but the clothes on their back, we can invite them in and love them in that way. And then they can shop, and we provide them with the toiletries in a little love bag, we call it. And that's a great way also to tell them about our weekly gatherings and invite them to join us for those. And so those are some other ways to help the community.
In other words, there are a lot of ways to engage, high contact, just ease into it, or just watch, whatever. So that's really great. Well, I love your story. I love this idea of, just take the next step. And I think that's the encouragement, regardless of where we are, regardless of where anybody is that's listening. I think that's the call. Take the next step. So it's not quite a lighthouse, but it has the same image. In I think it's Psalm 119, it says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet." And my understanding of that verse is the word for lamp refers in the Hebrew to a little ankle light that people would put on their ankles that provided just enough light for the next step.
Wow.
And so, so it's kind of like an ankle lighthouse. So I love that image, because that is ordinarily the way God always leads us, is a lighthouse for the next step. It's all we get, the next step. Very rarely do we get vision into what's beyond there. So, for everybody listening, I would really just encourage you to think, what's the next step that you may take? Whether it's Lighthouse RVA or something different, I believe there's a next step if we're listening. So, and you're a great example. So thanks so much for sharing your story, and I can't wait to just hear the next things that God has for you and for Lighthouse RVA.
Thank you so much, Tommy. I really appreciate it. This has been great.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll have all of the information about Lighthouse RVA in the show notes if you happen to take a look at that. But you don't even need that. TheLighthouseRVA.org. Thanks for listening. And as always, I encourage you to do something with the podcast. Take a step, take an action, take that next step in the right direction. So thanks so much for everything.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.